If you need a random function to control other events, this is the simplest method that I've found of doing so. For example, you have a capture the flag map, but you don't want the capture zone to be the same one every time. We can set this up to basically open different zones randomly. First thing we'll need to do is go ahead and create a 7 tile long, 7, and then we'll add 6 tiles back to this next side, and this is going to act as our programming space. Next, we're going to want to grab a sequencer. We're actually going to need 6 of them in total, or excuse me, 7 of them in total. And then go ahead and place it. Now when you're placing sequencers, they're always going to put their field of effect to the right hand side of where you placed it. So we'll go ahead and place all of these 7, just like so. Then we'll come back down to this first one, which we're going to edit. Now, the things that we care most about on this particular sequencer, we'll want to set the looping to infinite. We're going to want to bump the tempo all the way up to 180, which is as fast as this one can go. The length needs to be 6, because that's the number of sequencers, the number of random events. We're going to have 6 different zones, or 6 different things that could spawn potentially. I like the width and the height to be set to 1/2, though this isn't particularly relevant. Make sure that you're on the advanced options so that you can get all the stuff. For the activation type, we want it to be the toggle pause play, and this one will make a little more sense once we get into the actual function of what this thing's going to be doing. We want it to activate on game phase to be all. Okay, I guess it can't be all on this one, so we're going to do activate on game phase to be game start. Come on. We will stop the sequence when we're receiving from channel 10, and we will resume the. So now what we should get is a trigger that will activate each of the other 6 indefinitely. We've got to do a couple more settings changes to these other ones. So we're going to want to set these ones. This is the one kind of pain in the butt part of this one, is we need to set the BPM, the tempo, all the way down to 10. Not this one nice and low. We're going to bring our length, width, and height all down to 1/2. The length, as long as it's 1/2, the width and the height aren't as important. Then we need to also set a stop sequence on this one, channel 10, because when this one starts again, I'm sorry, we want it on channel 11. When this one starts again, when this main sequencer starts, we want this one to stop because it's going to be the same it's going to be the same trigger that sets both of those 2 events off. So now we'll go ahead and modify the rest of these to be the same. So now we have each of these other sequencers set to the same settings, and if we come around over here, we can see what this will do. It will create a pulse coming off of each of these secondary sequencers that will head towards the end, but not quite reach it. And this is going to be important for our next step. We'll go ahead and pull out a trigger. And when we place this trigger, go ahead and rotate it, and then set your grid snaps to 1. And the reason for this is that it's going to place it right in the center of the tile, and that's fairly important to our process because we want every single one of these to be in exactly the same spot. That creates a fairness kind of between them. We'll set this to trigger, or when triggered, transmit on channel 1. And then we're just going to copy this guy right down the line so that we have one of these on each of these proceedings, and then I'm going to come back through here and edit their channels. So this one's all the way at the end. It's going to be our channel number 6. And then channel 5. And these don't need to be in specific order. I find it's just easier for debugging purposes to have them in sequential order, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or 1, 2, 3, 4 if you're counting it the other way. This one should be 4, channel 3, channel 2, and channel 1. Now we're going to want to take another one of these triggers, and this one doesn't really matter so much on the location as long as it's outside of our sequencer field, because this one is going to be triggered by that trigger. So go ahead and just drop that guy down. We're going to say when triggered, transmit on. We're going to set this one to be the same as our stop trigger. That was channel 11. We're going to say trigger when receiving from channel 1. because now what's going to happen is when this sequencer hits that trigger, it's also going to pass the trigger over to this one, which will tell all the rest of the fields to stop, and this one to restart. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this guy, and drop it, one of them off for each. I turned on drop so they land flat on the floor, because I just like the way it looks better. And now we'll have to go back through and do this one to be triggered on channel, to be the same as the one that it's sitting next to. So 6 for this one, 5 for the next 4, 3, 2, 1 down the line. Okay, last couple of steps and we can test. First we'll need to place a button, which you can find down near the bottom of the devices list. And we will need to set this to be, when interacted with, transmit on channel 10, which is the stop of this sequencer function. Finally, we'll place a customized message HUD, or excuse me, a message HUD device. We need to change the message. In this case, we're just going to use the dice rolling example. The time from round start should be set to off. It'll be 10 seconds by default. The display time, I find 2 seconds is pretty good for a message this short. If it's a longer message, you would need more display time. The sound placement and what it looks like can be messed with. Those are good for our purposes. The most important piece is going to be show when receiving from channel 1, because it ties into this one. So we'll need to copy this HUD device down to here, and then change a couple things. The message to be roll the 2 in this case, and show when receiving from channel 2. This button can be replaced by a trigger if we wanted to do that. So that way players can say shoot it, or we could have it be set by a different event, player dies, or flag gets picked up, all those kinds of things. If you wanted it to be a shot trigger, you would just say damaged by, or triggered by damage, and then saying when triggered transmit on channel 10. The final thing is, some of you may have noticed that you can tell what number is going to be rolled by this, so if you can look at it, you will know exactly what it is that you're going to be rolling. The way to solve that is if you place a barrier down, players will no longer be able to see this. Go probably there, should be big enough. And we'll change the barrier style. Most of these you can't see through. Doesn't really matter which one you use. The blue and red force fields you can see through if you're close enough, and the translucent you can see through to some degree. So I personally really like the nebulas. We'll use the purple nebula this time. And this will just cast a field right around it so nobody can see what's happening inside of there. And during the game itself, that becomes an impermeable barrier. You can't pass through it, so nobody can get in there and see kind of what's going on. Oh, I forgot to set. On the barrier itself, you can set it to be active during all game phases. Right now I only have it set to game start, but that's kind of irrelevant because, you know, the game would be in a different spot anyway. So we push the button and we get a roll. It works pretty quickly with the current settings that I have it set up for. Give it a moment. I usually like to, let the message disappear before I'll make my next roll. It can occasionally be buggy. So, if you get some weird input, just let it sit for a moment and keep rolling. So that is everything you need to create a more sophisticated randomized function in Fortnite Creative.